Welcome to the How to Play for Elements, a 2 to 4 player card and dice game about collecting elements and using those elements to create substances. Before we dive into gameplay, let's take a quick look at the components that come with elements. We'll start with the element deck, which is the main drawing deck during the game. In the element deck, we have the 4 primary elements: fire, earth, water, and air. We also have 4 secondary elements: wood, metal, power, and oil. And finally, we have meta, which is a special element that acts like a wild card element in the game. Next, we have the substance deck. This is a deck that contains the things you are trying to create with your elements. Each substance has a name, a point total that each substance is worth if it is successfully created. Anything highlighted in blue are the elements needed to create the substance. And some substances have gems on the lower left of the card. These are bonus elements you will get as a reward if you create the substance naturally. The game also contains gems that are associated with the primary elements, such as fire gems, earth gems, water gems, and air gems. We also have 2 gems that make up the special meta element. There is also 2 D6s that come with the game, and the rulebook, which also includes a handy reference guide on the back page of the rulebook, which you will want to keep handy during gameplay. Before we get into gameplay, let's take a moment to take a closer look at the reference guide on the back of the rulebook. This will be handy to keep close by and refer to during the game. First, you have what you do for each outcome of the die roll. For a 1, you draw 1 card from the deck. For a 2, you draw 1 card from the discard pile. For a 3, randomly choose another player's card in hand, and you give them 1 card from your hand. For a 4, all players give 1 card in their hand to the player to their left. For a 5, trade 1 gem with another player, or trade with the common pool on the table. For a 6, take 1 card from another player's play area or hand. If you roll doubles, you take the appropriate die roll action and steal 1 gem from another player. On the bottom of the reference guide, there is a reference for combining the primary element gems you've collected to create a secondary element. For instance, you can use an air gem and a fire gem to create a power element. On the far right, it shows that you can trade in 1 of each type of primary element gem to create a meta element gem. So in the example of this roll of a 2 and a 6, the player gets to choose either draw 1 card from the discard pile or take 1 card from another player's play area or hand. But they do not get to take both actions. So we'll now move on to gameplay, where we will follow a game until the first substance is created and scored. And while we monitor the game, we'll leave this reference guide on the screen. Here, we've gone ahead and set up a 4-player game of elements. Each player starts with 4 cards from the element deck. They have a substance face up in front of them from the substance deck. And each player starts with a primary gem in front of them. We rolled off, and the player with the air gem is our first player. They chose air, so the next player cannot take a gem already selected. So you'll see that player 1 has air, and then earth, fire, and the last player has water. We've also seeded the discard deck with the top 3 cards from the element deck. First thing they do is draw a card and add it to their hand. Then they will roll the 2d6s. They rolled a 2 and a 6. They decide to take the fire element card from the discard pile, using the 2 they rolled. Next, they will play cards to attempt to create their pottery substance. Now, when you first start creating a substance, you must play a single primary element if the substance requires one, and you may only play that single primary element on the initial creation round for your substance. So in our example, the player chooses to use the fire element card they drew from the discard pile to start working on the pottery substance. Since this substance requires a primary element, and this is the first element played on the substance, the player cannot add any more elements this turn. Finally, the player checks to see if they have more than 5 cards or less than 3. If they have more than 5 cards, they must discard down to 5 cards. If they have less than 3 cards, they must draw up to 3, and then pass the dice to the next player. Our player with the Earth Gem has a house for a substance, which is worth 2 points, and they will get a bonus Earth Gem if they can create it naturally. First thing they do is draw a card and add it to their hand, and then roll the dice. They roll a 3 and a 4. They decide to use the 3 and randomly take a card from another player, and then give a selected card back from their own hand. Now they decide to play an Earth element card as their primary element for the house. Next up is our Fire Gem player, who has a furnace in front of them as their substance, which is worth 2 points and a bonus Fire Gem. They start their turn by drawing a card and then rolling the dice. They roll a 1 and a 3. They use the 1 to draw the top card of the element deck. They need a primary element of fire or air. This player doesn't have either of those cards in their hand, so they decide to use the Fire Gem to start the creation process. This leaves the player with 6 cards, so they must discard 1 card and decides to discard the oil card before passing the dice to the next player. Our water element player has an apple for their substance, which is worth 1 point if created. They draw a card and then roll the dice. They roll doubles, so they will take the 3 result action, which is to take a card randomly from another player and give them back a selected card from their own hand. And because of the doubles, they also get to steal a gem from another player. They decide to steal the Fire Gem from the Furnace card. This not only gives them another gem, but also slows down the creation of the furnace. A card or gem can be taken from cards as long as they have not been scored. Next, the player plays an air element card to start working on the apple. We are once again to the first player's turn. They will draw and then roll the dice. The roll is a 3 and a 4. The player decides to take the 4 action, so everyone must pass a card to the player on their left. Now that everyone has passed a card to the left, the player will continue with their turn. A fire element has already been put on the substance. Since a primary element is already in play, the player can play both the earth and water needed to complete the pottery substance. The pottery substance goes into the score pile, taking any cards and gems that were on it with it to the score pile and out of play. The player that completed the substance gets an element gem of their choosing just for completing the substance. And they will gather any bonus element gems shown on the substance card if they complete it naturally, meaning that no meta elements were used. And finally, the player draws a new substance to put in front of them. The first player to 10 points from creating substances is the winner. If all substance cards are used and no one makes it to 10 points, it is the player with the highest point total that will be declared the winner. And that is how you play Elements.